The salvage auction outside Reno occupied a lot on the far edge of the desert, where the city's neon glow faded into nothing, and the ground turned pale and flat in every direction. On a Thursday morning in late July, with the sun already working hard at 7 o'clock, 140 vehicles were lined up across 3 acres of cracked concrete. Some burned, some flood-damaged, some simply crushed into shapes that made their original forms difficult to reconstruct. This was not a place for the hopeful. This was a place for the practical, for the people who understood that value was not always visible on the surface, and for the people who simply needed parts cheap enough to be worth the drive. Darius Whitfield arrived with his daughter Imani in a truck that had seen 180,000 miles and was not particularly troubled by the fact. He was 40 years old, a black man, lean in the way that men get lean when they work with their hands in a small space day after day, with forearms that showed the specific kind of use that comes from reaching into engines and gripping things that resist being moved. His hands were dark and calloused at the knuckles, the way hands get when they have learned a trade and stayed in it. He wore a gray shirt that had been washed many times, boots that had been resoled once, and nothing else that required description. He looked among the assembled dealers and buyers in their better clothes and their confident postures, like a man who had arrived from a different world altogether, which was not incorrect. Imani was 8 years old and already understood that the proper behavior at an auction was to stand close to her father and observe. Her hair was in 2 neat braids that he had done himself before dawn, the way he had done them every morning since her mother passed 3 years before, and which he had learned to do by watching videos at the kitchen table at 5 a.m. with the same patience he brought to everything else that mattered. She had dark eyes that moved slowly and took in everything, and a patience unusual in a child her age that she had developed without being asked to develop it in the years of being raised primarily in a garage. The auction moved through its early lots with the brisk indifference of a process that does not require anyone to care about what is being sold. Flood-damaged pickups, a pair of motorcycles with bent frames, a delivery van that had been rear-ended with enough force to collapse its cargo area by 2 feet. The buyers moved through these with professional calm. Then, a flatbed came through the gate. What was on it had been a Ferrari. The color was not identifiable. The body had been through a fire serious enough to turn the paint to carbon and the chrome to a metallic gray without luster. The passenger side was intact in outline, but stripped of everything that made it interior. The driver's side had taken impact, not catastrophic, but enough to depress the door frame and misalign the roofline. What remained of the windows was nothing. The seat was a burned frame. The dashboard was a landscape of melted and re-hardened materials that had given up their original identities to the heat. Brad Sutton, who bought and sold high-end vehicles from a showroom near the Strip and wore clothes that announced this fact, looked at the car from where he stood near the front of the crowd and made a sound between a laugh and dismissive. "That's a parts car at best," he said to the man beside him, "and not many of those parts are worth pulling." The auctioneer noted the vehicle's status with the efficiency of a man who has sold things of all conditions and does not assign them moral weight. No title. Documentation incomplete. Sold as seen. Most of the crowd moved on mentally before he had finished the sentence. Darius was not looking at the body. He was looking at the engine bay, what was visible of it through the collapsed hood, which had been pried partially open either by the fire or by someone who had inspected it afterward, and then walked away. His eyes moved the way they always moved in the presence of machinery, not quickly, not with excited, but with the focused attention of someone performing a specific and practiced kind of reading. There is a particular skill that working people develop over many years, which is rarely discussed in the rooms where value gets assigned. It is the skill of seeing past surfaces. The world tends to look at burned metal and walk away. The world tends to look at a man in a washed gray shirt and decide what he can afford. But a working man's eyes, trained by 20 years of reading machines, see what the world's eyes do not. And in that small, unspoken gap between what is visible and what is real, entire futures sometimes turn. There was something in the subframe, a configuration, a set of mount points that did not belong to any Ferrari that had ever appeared in a dealership. He stood very still for a moment. Imani looked up at him. He said nothing. The auctioneer opened bidding at $200. Nobody moved. He came down to $150. $800, Darius said. The auctioneer looked at him with the mild surprise of a man who is surprised by nothing. Nobody countered. There was a pause during which several people in the vicinity glanced at Darius with expressions ranging from pity to quiet amusement. Brad said loud enough to carry, "You just bought a recycling project." Darius paid in cash, which he counted from an envelope in his shirt pocket, and arranged for the flatbed to follow him to his garage on the outskirts of Sparks. Imani climbed back into the truck without ceremony. As they pulled out of the lot, she looked at her father. "It still has its bones," she said. Darius glanced at her. "Yeah," he said, "it does." The garage sat on a half-acre lot that Darius rented month to month, which had always felt precarious and was becoming more so. The building was concrete block functional, with 4 lifts, of which 2 were currently in working order, and 1 had been waiting 6 months for a hydraulic component that had not yet been affordable. The office in the back had a coffee maker, a fold-out cot, a desk covered in technical diagrams, and a shelf of reference materials that represented the primary library of a man who had spent 20 years accumulating specific knowledge. Above the desk, in a small frame, was a photograph of Imani's mother at 26, smiling at something just past the camera, the way she had always smiled. The flatbed arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Darius and the driver got the Ferrari down onto the garage floor, and the driver left. Darius walked slowly around the car. Then he got a flashlight and looked for a long time at things that were not visible from a standing position. Imani settled cross-legged on the concrete near the workbench with a book she had borrowed from the school library. She had been doing this since she was old enough to sit up without assistance, accompanying her father to the garage and occupying herself with her own things while he occupied himself with his. She understood without having been told that the garage was a place of concentration and that the proper relationship to concentration was to leave it undisturbed. Darius found the first marker after 20 minutes. It was a chassis stamp in a location that did not correspond to any production Ferrari ever manufactured. Not because the stamp was wrong, but because it was additional. Beside the standard identification sequence, someone had pressed a secondary mark using a code Darius recognized because he had used it himself years ago in a facility in Maranello that no longer existed under that name. He sat back on his heels. The code belonged to a program called Ferrari Nero. It had run for 3 years inside Ferrari's Advanced Research Division and had produced exactly 1 prototype, a vehicle that had never been named because it had never been shown publicly, that had never been raced because it had been considered too far ahead of what the team could support, and that had been officially decommissioned after a test accident in the hills above Turin had damaged it beyond what the program's budget could address, or so the official record stated. Darius had been one of the 7 engineers on the program. He had been its lead on powertrain integration. He had known the car in the way that engineers know things they have spent 3 years building from partial ideas and incomplete drawings and arguments in the middle of the night about whether a particular solution would hold under the conditions it was being asked to hold under. He had known it in a way that was not sentimental, but was something close to personal. He had been asked to leave the program after the accident. The asking had not been kind. He had come back to the United States and built a garage business in Nevada and not spoken about Ferrari Nero to anyone for 7 years. He looked now at the car on the floor of his garage. He looked at the secondary stamp. He looked at the mount points he had noticed at the auction which he now understood completely. He stood, went to the office, poured coffee, and sat for a long time without doing anything. Then he went back out and started working. The work of understanding what the car still had began before the work of restoration. Darius spent the first 3 days doing nothing but documentation, photographs, measurements, written notes in a composition notebook that he dated and numbered. He needed to know before he touched anything that would alter its current state exactly what he was dealing with. The car had been through a fire and an impact, and then probably a period of exposure, and then a secondary period in whatever storage facility had held it before it reached the auction. Each of these events had its own damage signature, and the signatures overlapped in ways that required careful reading. What emerged from the documentation was this: the fire had been severe, but not catastrophic to the structural elements. The tubular space frame, which was not Ferrari's standard approach and was one of the Nero program's defining features, was intact. Deformed in places with stress fractures in 2 members, but intact. The body panels were gone or beyond recovery. The interior was gone. The engine had sustained heat damage to its ancillary systems, but its core block appeared to the eye and to the careful application of a borescope to be sound. It was, Darius thought, in better condition than the situation had any right to produce. He told Imani on the 5th evening, sitting at the kitchen table of the small house they rented 3 streets from the garage, that the car was something other than what the auction had represented it as. He did not tell her everything. He told her it was unusual, and that he was going to try to bring it back, and that it was going to take time and money they did not have in excess. The kitchen smelled of the rice and red beans his mother had taught him to make when he was 11 years old in a kitchen in Memphis, and which he still cooked every Sunday, because some traditions are how you remember the people who are no longer there to remind you. Imani listened to this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. She was 8 years old, and she had her father's patience and her mother's precision, which was a combination that made her already someone it was worth listening to when she decided to speak. "Is it like the ones in your book?" she asked. She meant the reference volume on Ferrari's racing history that lived on the shelf above the coffee maker. "Different from those," he said. "More than those." She thought about this. "Then it deserves to be fixed." The financial reality was not separate from the project. It was a condition of it running alongside everything else, like a second set of readings on a monitor that could not be ignored. Darius's garage operated on margins that left no room for speculation. He had 3 regular accounts, an apartment complex that kept 2 vehicles, a small trucking company with 1 aging van, and a set of individual customers who brought him their ordinary mechanical problems because he was cheaper than the dealers and considerably more reliable. These accounts paid the rent on the garage and the house and kept Imani's prescriptions current, which was the order of priority Darius had established and maintained without deviation. The prescriptions were for a condition of her heart, a structural irregularity that had been identified when she was 4 and had been managed since then with medication that kept the situation stable, and a recommendation offered at every annual appointment, with the same careful phrasing that surgical correction remained the preferred long-term outcome. The surgery cost a sum that was always described to Darius in terms designed to be encouraging about financing options, which he understood to mean it was not a sum that existed in his life in its current form. He had a folder at home with documents in it. He did not look at the folder every day. He did not need to. He worked on the Ferrari in the hours that the regular work did not occupy, which meant early mornings, which meant evenings after Imani was in bed, which meant the occasional full Saturday when the garage schedule permitted it. He worked systematically, which was the only way he knew how to work. He addressed the frame first because everything else depended on the frame. He had a MIG welder and a set of jigs that he had built himself over several years and that allowed him to establish reference points with sufficient accuracy for structural work. The stress fractures in the 2 members required cutting out a section of each and welding in new material, not an elegant solution, but a sound one. He sourced the tubing from a supplier in Sacramento who did not ask what it was for. Through these weeks, Imani developed a routine of her own. She came to the garage after school on the days her health allowed it, which was most days, and she did her homework on the workbench on the side of the room, away from where Darius was working. And when the homework was finished, watched. She had learned from long observation the basic grammar of what her father did, the difference between the careful inspection phase and the active work phase, the particular quality of his attention when he was solving something that was not yet solved, the moment when the quality of his movement changed because the solution had arrived. She had also begun in the past 2 months to bring him things: a cup of water, a flashlight when his was setting on the wrong side. Once correctly, a wrench of a size he was about to go looking for. She did this without calling attention to it, which was the right instinct. One evening in the 3rd week, Imani had fallen asleep on the fold-out cot in the office. Darius had spread his work jacket over her and left the office door open so the light from the garage could reach her without the direct overhead glare. At 2 o'clock in the morning, with the frame repair completed and the first section of bodywork preparation underway, he stood back and looked at the car from a distance. It did not look like much yet. It looked like what it was: a framework in the process of becoming something stripped of its surfaces, honest about its structure, in the way that things are honest when their exteriors have been removed. But Darius could see what it was going to be. He had always been able to do this, hold the finished form in his mind, while working through the current state of the unfinished thing. It was the quality that had gotten him onto the Nero program in the first place, the ability to look at a partial drawing or an incomplete assembly and understand its trajectory. He heard the office door move and looked over. Imani stood in the doorway in her socks, his jacket around her shoulders, squinting in the light. "I fell asleep," she said. "I know." She looked at the car. She was quiet for a moment. "It looks like a skeleton." "Right now it is." She considered this. "Skeletons aren't sad," she said. "They're just waiting." Darius looked at his daughter. Then he looked back at the car. "Yeah," he said. "That's right. There is something a parent learns slowly, and a single parent learns more slowly still, which is that the way you treat the things in your life teaches your child more than anything you will ever say to them. A child watching a father refuse to give up on a burned-out frame is also learning, without knowing she is learning, what it means to be looked at and not abandoned. The most important inheritance most of us pass down is not money. It is the quiet record of what we chose not to walk away from. The man who arrived on a Tuesday morning in the 5th week was 71 years old, with white hair and the hands of someone who had spent a career in engine bays. He drove a rented car that he parked at the curb, and he walked into the garage with the unhurried confidence of a person who knows exactly where he is going and is not concerned about whether he is expected. His name was Paolo Ricci. He had been the senior materials engineer on the Ferrari Nero program. He had been in practice the person who had approved Darius's powertrain integration approach and had defended it in the meetings where it had been challenged, and had, in the aftermath of the program's termination, said nothing publicly, which was a silence that had cost him something he had never discussed with anyone. Darius looked up from what he was doing and went still. Paolo looked at the car for a long moment. His expression did not change. Then he said in Italian, "I heard a rumor." "How did you hear it?" Darius said. His Italian was still functional after years of disuse, carrying the specific accent of someone who learned the language in a professional context rather than a childhood one. From a man in Sacramento who sells specialty tubing and who sometimes talks when he should not. Darius had nothing to say to this. Paolo walked slowly around the car. He crouched at the rear and looked at the subframe. He stood and looked at the engine bay. He put his hand on the tubular frame member that Darius had repaired, tracing the weld with a fingertip. and his expression moved briefly into something that could have been grief or could have been recognition. "It is real," he said, finally, in English. He had not switched languages by accident. "I was not certain the rumors were accurate." "It's real." Paolo straightened. He looked at Darius across the top of the chassis. "You know what happened to it?" "I know what I was told happened to it." Paolo nodded slowly. "And now, you know what actually happened to it." They stood in the garage in the Nevada morning, two men and the ghost of a project that had been buried in institutional convenience many years ago. Outside, a truck went by on the street. Inside, the fluorescent light made the bare metal of the chassis look like something that had been waiting a long time to be looked at directly. "I can help," Paolo said. Darius considered this. He had spent 5 weeks working alone on the belief that he could continue to work alone. But the car had systems whose original specifications existed only in documents that Paolo had access to, and in Paolo's memory, and in nowhere else that Darius could reach. "When can you start?" Darius said. The rumors began before Darius intended them to. This was the nature of a world where everyone who knew about rare cars knew everyone else who knew about rare cars, and information moved through that world the way a charge moves through a closed circuit, not because anyone deliberately transmitted it, but because the conditions for transmission existed and the charge found its path. Brad Sutton heard something at a dinner in Aspen from a collector who had heard something from a dealer who had heard something from the man in Sacramento. What he heard was imprecise, but imprecise information in Brad's experience was often more valuable than precise information because it left room for the kind of action that moved faster than certainty. He arrived at Darius's garage on a Saturday morning with the particular manner of a man who considers himself to be doing another man a favor by showing up. He was wearing a jacket that cost more than Darius's monthly rent and carrying a coffee from a place that did not operate in this part of town, which meant he had either driven out of his way for it or had it brought. He looked at the car for considerably less time than Paolo had. "I'll give you $200,000, he said, "right now. I can have a check cut by the end of the day." "No," Darius said. "You paid $800 for it." "I know what I paid." Brad recalibrated with the efficiency of someone who is accustomed to opening low. $400,000. That's $499,200 more than you're currently looking at. It's not for sale. Brad looked at him with the expression of a man who has concluded that the other man does not understand the conversation they are having. "You know what this is?" "Yes," Darius said. "I do." "Then you know what the market will pay for it." "I know what the market will pay," Darius said. "That's not what I'm deciding on." The look that crossed Brad's face was the look of a man encountering a logic he is constitutionally unable to process. He stayed another few minutes, said several more things that were variations on the same offer in different framings, and eventually left in a way that communicated he considered the conversation unfinished. It is worth pausing on what just happened in that exchange, because something is often missed about it. Brad was not insulting the car, he was insulting the man. In every number he raised, what he was really saying was, "Surely you can be moved. Surely a man in your circumstances, with your daughter, with your rented garage, with your washed gray shirt, has a price." And what Darius answered, without raising his voice, was that some men are not for sale, and that this is not a virtue you can buy your way into. It is something you build, the way you build everything else, slowly, over years, with the small decisions nobody is watching you make. Imani, who had been in the office during this exchange, emerged when the sound of Brad's car faded. "He wasn't actually offering to help," she said. "No," Darius said. "He was offering to end it." She looked at the car. "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It's not." The woman who arrived 2 weeks after Brad was different in every way that a person can be different from another person, while occupying roughly the same category of wealth. Isabella Romano was 53 years old, with dark hair and the particular bearing of someone who has spent a lifetime in rooms where the stakes were real and has never learned to perform anything she does not actually feel. She was the most significant private collector of Ferrari vehicles in Europe, a fact documented in auction records and museum loan agreements, and the occasional profile in publications that covered such things. And she had been involved in a capacity that Darius had known about, but never fully understood, in the politics around the Nero program at the time of its termination. She came alone. She drove herself in a rental car of the ordinary variety, and she parked and walked into the garage without calling ahead. She stopped when she saw the car and said nothing for a very long time. Paolo was in the garage that day, working on a documentation task at the bench. When he looked up and saw Isabella, something passed across his face that was complex enough that it could not be named in a single word. "Isabella," he said. "Paolo," she said. She did not look at him for more than a moment. She was looking at the car. Darius watched her from where he stood near the lift. He did not speak. He had learned from years of working on things that required patience that some moments were better observed than interrupted. She walked around the car. She looked at the frame from multiple angles. She looked at the engine bay. She looked at the bodywork that had been roughed in on the front quarter, which was still bare metal, but was already showing the form it was taking. She stood at the rear for a long time looking at the tail section. Then she turned and looked at Darius. "Who did the frame repairs?" "I did. The welds on the left rear member." "I know," he said. "The access was limited. I had to modify the jig." She looked at him steadily. Most welders would not have known to modify it. Most welders didn't spend 3 years on this chassis. A pause. She said, "You know what it is. Since the auction, and you kept it quiet. I needed to understand what I had first." She looked at the car again. When she looked back at him, the expression on her face was one that Darius recognized only because he had seen it once before, years ago in a conference room in Maranello, when the results of the first full performance evaluation had come back from the track. And a room full of experienced engineers had gone very still. "It was faster than anything we had built," she said. "We ran it on the test circuit 3 times before the accident. Each time the numbers were wrong. Wrong how? Wrong in the sense that they were better than the models predicted, which meant the models were wrong, which meant we were further ahead than anyone in that building had understood." She paused. "That is what frightened them." Darius said nothing. "The accident was real," she said. "I want to be clear about that. The test driver was injured not seriously. The car was damaged, but the decision to end the program was not made because of the accident. The accident was a reason that had been prepared in advance for a decision that had already been reached." "I know," Darius said. "I knew then. I tried to prevent it." She said this without sentiment, stating a fact. "I did not have enough power at that moment to prevent it. I have thought about that for 7 years." "So have I." The garage was quiet. Paolo had stopped what he was doing and was looking at his workbench. "What are you going to do with it?" Isabella asked. "Finish it," Darius said. And then he looked at the car. He looked at it the way he had looked at it on the first night when he had stood in this same garage and tried to understand what it was asking of him. "I'm going to find out what it can do," he said. "What it was always supposed to do. The world will sometimes offer a man 2 doors. Behind one is the easier number, the faster relief, the version of the story where the problem ends quickly and the people watching nod approvingly. Behind the other is the harder work, the longer wait, the version of the story where you finish what you said you would finish. There is no shame in choosing the first door. Circumstances make that decision for many people, and the decision is not theirs to judge. But when a man does have the choice and chooses the second, his children learn that the size of the offer is not the same as the size of the man. The final phase of the restoration took 11 weeks, working every available hour with Paolo present for 4 days out of 7 and available by phone for the rest. Isabella, after a conversation that Darius had not anticipated and that had lasted until 2 o'clock in the morning on the night of her first visit, became a source of documentation, original program files, technical drawings, as material specifications that she had kept for 7 years, in a way that suggested she had expected the car to resurface eventually, or had hoped it would. The work was the kind of work that has its own rhythm once it reaches a certain stage. Not frantic, not slow, but consistent and purposeful in the way that things move when the people doing them know exactly what they are building toward. Darius fabricated bodywork components by hand, where no original references existed, working from the drawings and from the logic of the design, the way one panel implied the next, the way the aerodynamic intent of the nose was continued through the door sills and resolved at the rear. He was not trying to replicate what had existed. He was trying to complete what had been intended. Imani's presence in the garage during this period was different from what it had been in the early weeks. She had moved gradually and without announcement from an observer to participant, not in the work itself, but in the atmosphere around it. She brought things, held things, noted things that Darius occasionally forgot he had moved, and asked questions that were almost always better than the questions an adult would have asked, because they came from someone who did not yet know which questions were considered naive. One evening in the 9th week, she asked, "How do you know when it's done?" Darius thought about this seriously, which was how he thought about her questions. "When the thing you built matches the thing you understood it wanted to be," he said. She considered this. "Cars want things. Things that people build well," he said, "carry the intention of the people who built them. Sometimes the intention doesn't get finished. When you finish it, you can feel the difference." She was quiet for a moment. "Like when a sentence ends right." He looked at her. Exactly like that. The evening the engine ran for the first time, no ceremony had been planned. It was a Tuesday in October. Paolo was there. Imani was there, having come from school, and settled in her usual position near the workbench. Darius had finished the final connections that morning, and had spent the afternoon going through a pre-start checklist that ran to 4 pages, annotated with the specificity of a man who has learned that the difference between a successful first start and a catastrophic one is the quality of the checklist. He primed the fuel system. He ran through the electrical check. He looked at Paolo, who nodded. He turned the key. The engine turned over 3 times. Then it caught. The sound it made was not like the sound of an engine starting. It was like a sound that had been waiting inside the building for the right conditions to emerge. A deep, complex note that filled the garage the way water fills a vessel, finding every corner pressing against the walls. It was not loud in the way that show engines are loud. It was powerful in the way that things are powerful when they are doing exactly what they were designed to do, without excess, without theater, with the full commitment of everything that had been built into them. Darius sat in the driver's seat with his hands on the wheel and said nothing. The sound moved through the garage and through him simultaneously. Paolo stood at the front of the car with one hand on the fender and his head bowed. Imani stood near the workbench with both hands at her sides and a look on her face that was not quite a smile and was not quite something else. It was the look of someone who has believed in something for a long time and is now watching it be confirmed. Darius looked at her. She put both thumbs up. He turned the engine off. The garage went quiet in the particular way that a space goes quiet after a significant sound. The absence as present as the sound had been. "We need to run it longer before any load testing," he said. His voice was steady. "Yes," Paolo said. His voice was not. Darius sat in the car for another moment. Then he got out, went to the office, and poured 3 cups of coffee. He brought 2 of them out. Imani got the third, which was mostly milk and sugar, and contained coffee in only a formal sense. They stood in the garage with their cups and the car that was now, after many weeks and many hours, what it had been built to become, and did not say anything because there was nothing that needed saying. The invitation to Monaco had come as Isabella had predicted it would, from sources that Darius had not contacted and would not have known how to contact. Word of a restored Ferrari Nera. Not a rumor this time, but a confirmation carrying the weight of Paolo Ricci's credibility, and Isabella Romano's association had moved through the collector world with the velocity of news that has been withheld long enough to become extraordinary. The event was a private exhibition connected to the Monaco Classic, held in a venue near the harbor, with a specific quality of light that comes from having the Mediterranean 100 meters from the windows. 200 people had been invited, who represented between them an amount of money that declined to be understood in ordinary human terms. Darius drove the Ferrari there himself. This was not standard for a vehicle of its value, but Darius wasn't a man who allowed things he had built to be transported by someone else without a reason that outweighed his discomfort with the arrangement, and no such reason presented itself. Imani traveled in the passenger seat for the last portion of the route, a concession to logistics rather than sentiment, though it was both. When the car entered the exhibition space, the room did what rooms do when something arrives that they were not prepared to be adequate for. People stopped. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Several people who had been examining other vehicles turned and looked, and then moved toward the Ferrari with the unconscious directness of people following something they cannot explain. Darius parked the car and stepped out and stood beside it, in his clean but unremarkable clothes, and waited. This was something he was good at, waiting without performing the waiting. Brad Sutton appeared within 4 minutes. He was not the Brad Sutton of the Sparks garage visit, who had carried the assumption that his offer would eventually be accepted. He was a version of Brad Sutton under pressure, which was a less composed version. He quoted a number at Darius that had 7 digits framing it as an opening. Darius said he wasn't ready to discuss terms. Brad said there were people in the room who would go higher. Darius said he understood. Brad said he was the person who had the relationships to handle a transaction of this complexity. Darius said he appreciated that. Brad said the number could go to 1.5 million. Darius said he would be in touch. He would not be in touch, and they both understood this. But the convention was useful. Isabella found him later in the evening standing at the edge of the exhibition space, near the car watching the room. She stood beside him. 47 people have asked me to facilitate an approach, she said. I told all of them that I have no role in the sale. That's accurate, he said. I know. A pause. But if I did have a role in the sale, the number would be considerably more than what anyone has offered tonight. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Are you going to sell it? Darius looked at the car. It was attracting continuous attention, people circling it, people photographing it, people looking at it the way people look at things that they understand are beyond their reach and find that this does not diminish their desire to look. Eventually, he said, tonight is not the night. She nodded. What is tonight? He thought about it. Tonight is for looking at it and knowing what it cost, he said, and for letting other people look at it and not know. She considered this. Then she said, You built something remarkable. We built it once, he said. I finished it. She was quiet for a moment. That is not a small distinction. The night of the Monaco exhibition was a Tuesday. On the following Friday morning, Darius drove the Ferrari to a section of coastal road above Monaco that was closed for the morning as part of a permissions process that Isabella had facilitated without asking for anything in return. The road ran along the clifftop for 3 kilometers, with the sea below and the early light coming in at an angle that made everything the road surface, the stone barriers, the color of the water looked like it had been recently decided. He had brought Imani. She was in the passenger seat in a jacket that was too light for the morning air, but that she had refused to exchange for a heavier one, holding the window edge with both hands and looking at the road ahead. "Ready?" Darius said. She looked at him. She was not frightened. She had never been frightened of things her father built. "Yes," she said. He drove. What the car did on that road is difficult to describe in ordinary terms, which is why the people who build cars like this use the language of physics, acceleration figures, lateral loads, aerodynamic downforce at specific velocities. These numbers exist for the Ferrari Nero, and they are extraordinary, but the numbers are not the experience of what it does. What it does is translate intention into motion with a directness that removes every intermediary between the driver's will and the car's response. It does not correct. It does not compensate. It does what it is asked to do with a completeness of something that was designed by people who understood the thing they were designing at a level that permitted no compromise. Darius drove to the end of the road and slowed and turned around and drove back. When he stopped, Imani sat in her seat for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "It's like it knows what you mean." Darius looked at the road ahead. The light was still coming in at the same angle. The sea was still below them. "Yeah," he said. "That's right." On the drive back to the hotel, Imani asked, "Are you happy?" He thought about the question the way he thought about important questions, not quickly. "I think I am," he said. "I think this is what happy feels like when it's real." She nodded. She had been gathering this information for years, and she stored it with the same seriousness she brought to everything. "Good," she said. The months that followed carried the particular quality of change that arrives not as a single moment, but as a series of quieter shifts that accumulate into a different life. The sale of the Ferrari Nero, which took place through Isabella's connections 6 weeks after Monaco, to a museum in Milan that had been pursuing it with the patience of an institution that understands how to wait, produced a figure that Darius's brain struggled to treat as real for some time. He was specific about what he did with it, the medical fund for Imani's surgery, which was scheduled for the following spring. The repayment of a small number of debts that had been accumulating at the edges of things, a new hydraulic component for the lift that had been waiting a year, and then a conversation that he had not expected to have. It came from a legal firm in Milan representing Ferrari's corporate archives. The firm had been contacted in connection with the museum acquisition and had conducted a review of historical program records. The review had located original documentation from the Ferrari Nero project, including a set of personnel records that reflected the program's official engineering team. The letter was formal and precise. It acknowledged certain historical inaccuracies in the program's termination record. It noted that a review had been undertaken in light of new documentation, and it enclosed on a separate page a revised personnel credit that had been added to the official Ferrari archive. Darius read it at the kitchen table in the morning while Imani was at school. He read it twice. Then he looked at the photograph above the desk in the back office of the garage in his mind, the one of Imani's mother smiling at something just past the camera, and he thought about how she had always told him that the work would speak for itself eventually, if he could only outlast the people who needed it not to. The document listed the Nero program's engineering credits in their corrected form. It listed Paolo Ricci as senior materials engineer. It listed 4 others, whose names Darius knew, and at the top of the list, where it had always belonged and had never been allowed to appear, Chief Engineer, Ferrari Nero Project, Darius Whitfield. He folded the letter. He put it in the drawer with the other documents that mattered next to the folder of medical paperwork, and above the folder that held the lease for the garage. He made coffee. He went to work. That evening, Imani came home from school with a project she had been assigned on the history of engineering. She had been tasked with choosing a subject and had decided without consultation to write about a car. She wanted to interview her father. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, with a composition notebook open in front of her, holding a pencil, with the seriousness of a journalist who has not yet decided whether to record or to write. "What is engineering?" she began. Darius thought about it. "Understanding what something wants to be," he said, "and then making it be that thing." She wrote this down. "What's the hardest part?" "Patience," he said, "and knowing the difference between something that's broken and something that's unfinished." She wrote this down. She looked up at him. "Are they different?" "Very different," he said. "Broken things need to be let go. Unfinished things need to be continued." She wrote this down, too. Then she looked at her notebook for a moment, and then at him. "Like the Ferrari," she said. "Like the Ferrari," he said. She closed the notebook. The kitchen was quiet in the good way, the way it had been more evenings than not since the project had begun, and the garage had given them back a version of themselves that the previous years had been slowly compressing. The light above the table was warm. Outside the window, the Nevada evening was moving toward dark in its unhurried way. Imani put her pencil down and looked at her father with the particular expression that had been hers since infancy, the one that meant she had been watching shed gray shirt and decide what he can afford. But a working man's eyes, trained by 20 years of reading machines, see one thing long enough to have arrived at a conclusion. "I think," she said, "that you are the most patient person I know." Darius looked at his daughter. He thought about 7 years of carrying something that could not be explained. He thought about a burnt chassis on a desert auction lot. He thought about a sound that had filled a garage on a Tuesday evening in October and pressed against all the walls. "I learned it from the work," he said. "The work teaches you things." She nodded. This satisfied her. She picked up her pencil again, opened the notebook to a fresh page, and at the top of it wrote 3 words: "Things worth finishing." The story of a man and a car is, in the end, never really about the car. It is about what we choose to spend our lives on while we are here, and who we choose to spend it next to, and whether the people watching us, the ones whose hair we braid in the morning and whose questions we answer at the kitchen table, will one day open a notebook and write down 3 words that are also the shape of who they have decided to become. The world will keep offering numbers. It will keep mistaking a man's clothes for the size of him. None of that matters in the long run. What matters is that somewhere, in some garage at 2 in the morning, somebody is refusing to let a good thing stay unfinished. And somewhere, in the doorway of that garage, a child in socks is watching and learning and waiting to be the next person who knows how to look.